Adonai tzvas siftach ufi yagid t'lasechel lasos nachas ruach liyatzreinu. So again, b'siyata dishmaya, we're standing across from Makom Mikdash in the holiest place in the world, in the holiest place that we have access to at this moment. And so what I'm going to try to do tonight is I'm going to really do what I do best, which is share a lot of seemingly random sources that have very little to do with each other. And we're going to try to bring it down into one key message that we can take with us for this Chanukah and ultimately for the rest of the year. And so I want to first open with the tefillah that's brought down in the Sefer Osef Amarim al Chanukah Purim from the Tzaddik and Gaon, who I've had the privilege of getting a bracha from and visiting, Rabbi Yaakov Meir Shechter Shlita, who says, Avakesh ma'Hashem yisbarach she'ya'ir banu or ha'yischadshus shelo kvar dibarnu kama pa'amim b'Chanukah v'chol pa'am tzarich loymar ha'diburim me'yischadshus. That we ask from Hashem that we should light up inside of us this light of His chadshus, of renewal. For we speak about Chanukah each and every year. We get used to what we think the holiday is all about. But each time we have to say new things, and certainly with a sense of newness. And so the first thing I wanted to bring down was a beautiful quote from the introduction to Rav Dov Ber Pinson's Sefer, 8 Lights, 8 Meditations for Chanukah. And he writes, Chanukah, with its unique combination of history, ritual, food, and fun, is truly one of the most accessible holidays on the Jewish calendar. But it's also one of the deepest and most meaningful. From the revolutionary historical events of the Chashmonaim, to the social and psychological dangers of assimilation, to the existential aspects of faith, courage, and independence, the story of Chanukah is at once exciting and eternally relevant as it describes both the salvaging and security of the Jewish people in a time of national distress. And what Rav Dov Ber Pinson's really highlighting is that the story of Chanukah, the miracles of the victory in battle, and of the Nes Pach Shemen, of the tiny jug of oil that was found that burned for 8 days, is not only captivating, but it's got an eternal message. A message that, if we choose to live with, it can change not only our Chanukah and not only our year, but God willing, it can change the rest of our lives. And so the Gemara asks this question in Masech Shabbos, Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and it's brought down by the Beis Yosef. And that's the question of Mai Chanukah. What is Chanukah? And Chazal teach us that on the 25th of Kislev, they searched and they found only one jug of oil that was tar with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And so that's what it really is all about. According to the Beis Yosef, according to the Gemara, the entire essence of Chanukah is the Nes Pach Shemen. And so then the Beis Yosef goes on to ask his famous question. And that question is, if there was enough oil for one day, why do we celebrate Chanukah for 8 days? The miracle itself only occurred 7 days. And so there are many, many answers given. I myself have a sefer and I've learned through most of a sefer, thank God, that has over 500 different answers to this famous question of the Beis Yosef. But the question is really what's important. We have to each find one of those reasons that connects us deeply. But we have to realize what the P'nei Halacha says, that Chanukah is above nature. As Rav Melamed writes, Gam yimei HaChanukah shemvatim es ma'alta shel ha'Torah she'ba'al peh shayichim u'madriga she'ma'al ha'teva lefichach madlikim neiros b'meshech 8 yamim v'holchim u'masifim ad 8 neiros. Chanukah belongs to the realm of the supernatural. It's above nature. It reveals the incredible, lofty status that we have, Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah. And therefore, says Pnei Halacha, we light candles for 8 nights. We celebrate Chanukah for 8 nights, adding a new candle each night because Chanukah is Me'al HaTeva. 7 is nature. We know we have 7 days of the week, 7 classical notes in music, 7 colors of the rainbow. The natural world is 7. The 8 nights of Chanukah is Me'al HaTeva. It's supernatural. And this is what the Malchus Shlomo, the Hornetsteipel Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Hornetsteipel, Tzchusi Yagen Aleinu, says, when he said on Zosh Chanukah Tafshin Yud Zayin, in the name of the Rebbe from Rizhin, Tzchusi Yagen Aleinu, Masha tzadikim yacholim lifo ma'Hashem Yisbarach b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim yachol Yehudi pashut lifo ma'Hashem Yisbarach b'Zosh Chanukah. What the greatest tzadikim can do on the Yomim Noraim, on the Yemei Din of Rosh Hashanah and the Yom HaKappara, the Day of Atonement of Yom Kippur. Yachol Yehudi Pashut, a simple Jew can do that on Zosh Chanukah, on even the last day of Chanukah. And the next source is really not a traditional source, but it's something that a good friend of mine, Yedid Nafshi, Ashi Bloom, sent out. And he said that Chanukah is, of course, a lashon of chinuch, of rededication, of education. Because perhaps we had goals in Tishrei. Perhaps we made kabbalos on ourselves on Rosh Hashanah, during the Seres Me'Tshuva. We resolved to not do things on Yom Kippur. But maybe we stumbled. We forgot about them in Cheshvan, when the holiness of the holidays started to fade, when the winter started to get a little bit colder. And Kislev, and specifically Yemei Chanukah, the days of Chanukah, it's a time to educate, to reorient ourselves, to remember the goals we once had, and to begin again. It's to realize that we're in a constant state of renewal, of Chanukah's Hamizbeach, Chanukah's Habayis, of rededication. And that's why one of the many, many reasons that Chanukah is called Chanukah is from this, not only this lashon of chinuch, but Chanu b'Kaf Hey. They rededicated the temple and they stopped fighting on Kaf Hey, Kislev. The next source comes from the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim, Taf Ayin Reish, Eis Beis, Katan Beis. And says the Shulchan Aruch, Riboy has udos shemerabim b'hem heim udos harshus shelo kavuvim l'mishta v'simcha. And the Ramah writes on here, v'yesh amim sheyesh k'tzas mitzvah riboy has udos mishum de b'osan hayamim haya Chanukah samizbeach. V'nahagin laimar zmiros v'shavachos v'sudos shemerabim b'hem v'az have sudos mitzvah. Yesh amim sheyesh lechol gvina v'Chanukah l'fisha hanes nasa v'chalav ha'achila yudis es ha'oyeh. On Chanukah, there's maybe tzas mitzvah because of Chanukah, Samizbeach, Chanukah's Habayis, to have a little bit of feast, to have seudos, but it's not part of the actual holiday. On Chanukah, there's no rabbinic enactment to feast. The observance of the holiday is entirely spiritual. It's about Halal v'Hodah. It's about thanking and praising Hashem. And this is similar to the way the Mishnah Brura explains on the same place, Shelo kavim l'mishta v'simcha ela lahalul lahodos. V'nir hatam de lo kavu kan l'simcha k'mo b'purim ki b'purim haya hagzer l'hashmil l'arages agufos shu bitul mishta v'simcha v'lo es hanefasha shafilu hemiru datam chas sham l'haya mekabel osam l'kach she'atzil makadosh baruch hu mimenu kavu l'halul l'shavach l'yisparach. Gam kein al mishta v'simcha, mash ein kein v'masa danti yochus. Shal gazar aleim l'harig l'hashmid rak tzaras u'shmados, k'tei l'hamir dasam. V'im hayu Yisrael machnim lahem lios kevushim tachas yadam u'lahalos lahem mas v'chozrin la'emunasam chas shalom. La'im v'akshim yoser. What the Mishnah Brura is telling us is that the reason why Chanukah the observance of Chanukah is entirely spiritual. It's about thanking and praising Hashem as opposed to Purim, which is a day of entrenching ourselves in physicality, of giving gifts to one another, of feasting, is because Chanukah itself, Antiochus and the Greeks, they decreed to uproot our spirituality. They decided that it wasn't enough that we should, as opposed to Haman, who said, no matter if the Jew converts, if the Jew doesn't convert, the fact that was born a Jew, that means we'll kill him, he'll die as a Jew. With Antiochus, the battle was entirely different. The Greeks were fine with the Jews as long as they converted, as long as they followed the Hellenist ways, as long as they followed the government, as long as they paid their taxes. That's when the Jewish people would have been fine. But as opposed to the story of Purim, where Haman was ready and willing to kill the Jews no matter what. And that's really the essence and the distinction between the two rabbinic holidays that we have. Chanukah is the holiday of spirituality, whereas it's the holiday of reconnecting and rededicating ourselves to living as Jews, to fighting for what it means to be a Jew, for fighting for Jewish values, as opposed to Purim, which we celebrate the very existence of the Jewish people, the very survival of the Jewish people, and the fact that no matter what, we can thrive as a nation connected to Hashem. And this is what Mori V'Rabbi Rav Shmuel Zakir Shlita says in his Sefer Oros HaMoadim, where he explains, V'gam yivor lama timu es hashmanim l'mno hadlakas hamnora dehari v'var b'sfarim shadlakas hamnora b'beis hamikdash haya al das hadlakas haneir Shabbos shugilu shel or haganus ayin heitev b'bnei Sachar lachein timu es hashmanim lachein ratu la'akor kol zika sheyesh l'Yisrael im ur hamiti shel asid lavo. Rav Zucker explains that the entirety of the struggle between the Jews and the Greeks, between Antiochus and the Chashmonaim, was the fact that they just simply tried to uproot our holiness. They would stop at absolutely nothing until the Jews were not connected to their Judaism. And that's what the Malchus Shlomo says, and how we're going to see Rav Kluger explains this. The Malchus Shlomo says, "Urshayim biyad tzadikim v'zeidim biyad oskei tzarasecha," commenting on a line we say in Al HaNisim. Lich'era kasha, seemingly it's difficult. Ma'i riboy haneis b'zeh shehem hayu urshayim v'anachnu tzadikim. Why was it a miracle that we say in Al HaNisim, "Thank you Hashem for saving us," because they were urshayim and we were tzadikim? What does that matter? And they didn't follow you and didn't learn your ways, and we toiled in Torah. Says the Malchus Shlomo, an incredible thing, that the nature of the world is that the wicked prosper, that Rishayim will be above tzaddikim. And it was a miracle beyond the natural order. That people who spent their lives sitting and learning were able to take up arms, were able to defeat the mighty Greek army. And so that really brings the question of, what does it mean to fight? What does it mean to fight against those who try to take away our religion? And says the Malchus Shlomo, yes, the wicked prosper. Generally, might is right. We see in society today that the one who has the gold makes the rules. But that's not how it's supposed to be. Me'al hateva, the way of the Ribbono Shel Olam, the way the Ribbono Shel Olam showed us, and the way the Ribbono Shel Olam shows that it can be, is that the tzaddikim are above the Rishayim. That even though it looks like the good suffer and the wicked prosper, at the end of the day we know that that's really not true. The righteous are the ones that receive the greatest good. And it's the Rishayim that are ultimately suffering, living empty lives, meaningless lives, both in this world and the world to come. And this is what Rav Kluger says in his Sefer Oscha Avakesh, on the 81st page, where he says, Kol hayamim tovim hachamim barov kedushasim kavu shmonas mei Chanukah lahadlik b'hem neiros Chanukah, that our sages enacted with their great holiness, with their great wisdom, these 8 days to light the neiros of Chanukah. V'haneiros halalu mamshichim l'soch halev, and these candles, these lights, they continue into our hearts. Shal mi shiroasam, of any person that sees them. This godly light, this light of holiness, this power to connect ourselves to godliness. And he says, the rest of the Yamim Tovim are in the kites. We know that Sukkot is the middle, the end of that, and Pesach is the beginning, and Shavuos falls in that time period of the summer. Which is a time of light, a time of warmth, a time where we feel Hashem. Most of them are in the middle of the month. At the time when the moon is at its fullest. The time of light in the month. And Chanukah, Chanukah is in the winter, at the end of the month, the time where the moon's disappearing. And the mitzvah of lighting the neiros of Chanukah is at night. Not like all the other mitzvahs of the holidays, which are in the day, like Arba Minim, like Shofar, like Chris Megillah. Ki Chanukah hu matana shenitna lanu. Because Chanukah is a gift that was given to us. Davka b'soich chashchas hagalus, specifically in the time, in the darkness of exile. I mitzvah hadlakas neiros Chanukah, with the mitzvah of the lighting of the Chanukah candles, hachachamim nasnu lanu, they gave us, as a koyach lachushas, or Hashem, this power, this possibility, to feel Hashem, the light of Hashem. Gam she'anachnu b'matzav yared, even when we're in the lowest, darkest, deepest place. Shurim b'ma'amke hagalus v'ha'olam hazeh, in the deepest depths of exile of this world. Chag Chanukah making es haderech likras bias haMashiach. It's this holiday of Chanukah that's allowing us, that's creating this path towards Mashiach. She'az ha'elokus tayir b'gilui. Because then, that's when godliness will be shining openly. And so we spoke about that Chanukah is beyond nature. We spoke about that Chanukah is all about the spiritual over the physical, and it's a holiday that is kulo, that is entirely focused on spirituality, on the light of Hashem, on connection to Hashem. But now we have to talk about what true spirituality means. And true spirituality obviously connects us back to Torah, to seeing the beauty in the Torah. Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita taught, V'akoyach sheyesh b'mei ha'chanukah l'kar v'chokim ein ha'mechaven rak l'kir v'chokim mamish davka. Shari kvar yidchen shiyu harbe ma'anshe shlomenu anachshav ki v'chokim gmurim. V'tzarech l'kar gam osam. Dinei kol mi shalom Torah v'hu eina oimen al ha'ma'or sheba. V'la'amku sheba. V'hu mevin es psuke Torah be'osa havana shaisa lo b'mei yaldusa. Hinei gam hu nechshav l'rachok. Says Rav Meyer, anyone who doesn't see the beauty and depth in the Torah is considered a rachok, is considered far away. Chanukah isn't just about the misyavnim. those who assimilate it entirely. It's also about the Hellenist Jews, the Jews who see Torah as societal, as routine, as secondary to their worldly pursuits. On Chanukah, we have the power to get out of that understanding, that childlike understanding that we're brought up with, to see the beauty of Torah, to see the power of Torah, to see the depth of Torah, to bring them back and to bring us back to a place where we realize that Torah is deep, that there's always deeper and deeper levels to go, that as tzaddikim teach us, the more that we learn, the more we understand that we don't know anything at all. Because that's what Torah is about. It's about seeing Hashem within the words. It's about seeing Hashem within our tradition. Ananashik Savis Yahavis, that Hashem, so to speak, brought himself and enclosed himself within the Torah. And it's our job to be able to reveal him through the Torah. And Rav Nosson of Nemer, of the primary student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Schusiagin Aleinu, in Likutei Halachos, says an extremely powerful thing. He writes, "V'zeu b'chinas ner Chanukah." This is the level, the concept of ner Chanukah. Kim malchus harsha hizkaru b'Yisrael v'ratu levatel avodas beis hamikdash. The evil kingdom, the Greeks, they came into Israel and they resided in Israel and they wanted to nullify the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Shesham ikar hasimcha v'chol hatikunim hanizkarim la'el. Because there is the main point of happiness and joy and the completion and rectification of the world. V'sham v'Beis Hamikdash kol avodas hakorbanos she'em na'asim b'simcha kenizkar la'el. And all the avodah, the korbanos, was done with incredible simcha. And the question is on Chanukah, do we recognize that? Do we really feel that? Do we understand that the reason why the Greeks wanted to uproot Yiddishkeit, wanted to uproot the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash, was because they couldn't stand a world where there was a truth, where there was a capital T truth, where there was absolute truth, where there was nothing except the Ribono Shel Olam, where they weren't in control. And so that's what it means when we say that they wanted to be mevatel the avodah Beis Hamikdash, because that's the ikar of simcha. The ikar of happiness, of joy, the true pleasure, the only real pleasure in this world is avodas Hashem. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Kirvas Elokim Li Tov, that the only true good is a connection to the Almighty. And on Chanukah, we try to internalize that message. We try to rededicate ourselves and recommit ourselves to that message. But Ani Kirvas Elokim Li Tov, the only good in this world is when we have a connection with the Ribono Shel Olam. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, in his book From Optimism to Hope, writes, Chanukah is about the freedom to be true to what we believe without denying the freedom of those who believe otherwise. It's about lighting our candle while not being threatened by or threatening anyone else's candle. As Jews, we don't try to missionize. We don't try to convert. We don't run around screaming, "You're wrong and we're right." Because that's not what Judaism teaches. But unfortunately, most people don't do that simply because they don't have the conviction to actually say that you're wrong and we're right. It's what Rabbi Sachs is telling us, is that Chanukah is the time of year where we have to actually commit ourselves to these truths. Where we have to say, this is the truth. And where we can say that you can believe whatever you want, but it doesn't matter. Obviously it matters. And we know that the only rectification will be in Olam Haba, when we know and we will realize that the entire world will see Hashem. But it's not our job to convince the world. It's our job to convince ourselves. And when we truly convince ourselves that Torah is true, that Torah is meaningful, that a connection with the Almighty is the ultimate good, that it's the only good, when we realize that, and when we internalize that, and when we spread that to our fellow Jews, then that's when we are going to see the revelation and the realization of the pasuk U'mal ha'aretz de'as Hashem kimayim liyam echasim. Judaism, and this is all based, what I'm not going to say from now on is from Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tax in his incredible sefer, Thinking Jewish Teenagers' Guide to Life. Judaism believes that what you do in your nisyonos, in your tests, in your challenges, in your struggles is who you are. Your choices are the reflection of your character. There's so much in life that a person simply cannot control. True success or failure is determined by success or failure in your free will ordeals, in the choices that you make. When you grasp the fact that you are in control, that even though Hashem's running the show, that you have choice, that in where it really matters in life, you're free. You then begin to grasp who you really are and what you're meant to be doing here. If you see your decisions and actions as a passive result of your background, of the circumstances that you now find yourself in, you've not begun to live. It's only when you recognize that you have free will, that you have the ability to choose who you are, to choose how you live. That's what it means to be a Jew. That's what it means to be a human being. That's what it means to be alive. At the end of the day, what you choose is who you are. And that's why Chanukah is considered, we get to every holiday and the tzaddikim say, this holiday, mamish, this is the greatest. And that in itself is a lesson that we have to live with, that we have to realize, we have to recognize that the moment we're living in, the time period that we're in, on Pesach, Pesach is the highest of the high. On Sukkot, Sukkot is the highest of the high. Shabbos, Mein Olam Haba, we can't even fathom, it's the highest of the high. A regular mincha on a Thursday in the middle of Cheshvan, that's the highest of the high. And Chanukah, when we get to Chanukah, it's also the holiest. But that's why Chanukah is such an incredibly powerful holiday, such an incredibly powerful time period. Because the entire holiday is kulo spiritual, as we spoke about, but it's also about the rededication aspect, about choosing and choosing again to live as Jews, to commit ourselves to serving Hashem, to commit ourselves to the truth of Torah, to commit ourselves of sharing that message with others. And that's really what the power of Chanukah is. The power of choice. The power of adding light in the midst of darkness. The previous Alexander Rebbe, Utliagan Aleinu, the Imre Menachem, in the sefer says, "V'heitza hayutza b'zman hachashchus ka'asher itanu hayom l'zchus l'or ha'Torah hinei hu al yidei mitzvahs ner Chanukah ki ner Chanukah hu zeicher la'alakas ha'menorah u'b'cha ha'menorah halo nishba or ha'chachma ki mamar zal ha'roeh sheyachim yadris v'simanach menorah b'dara But it says Zochim Torah. Says the previous Alexander Rebbe Schusi Agen Olein Vel Kol Yisrael Amen in Parshas Vayishlach. The way to survive darkness, the way to survive galus, the way to connect to the light of Torah is through the Neros of Chanukah. And yes, the tzaddikim say that there's an inyan to just look at the candles and to bask in their light, in the light of the Araganas. And that's all well and holy. But what the Imam Menachem is saying is deeper. As we explained, the Neros Chanukah is a mitzvah to add light into the darkness. It's a mitzvah, the only mitzvah that we have, besides for Hal and Hodah, but it's the only practical mitzvah that we have, the only mitzvah aseh, that's a maisa that we have on Chanukah. And so through the Neros Chanukah, we're making that choice. And when we can make that choice and we can commit ourselves to Yiddishkeit, to Torah, to Hashem, even in a world of darkness, a world that's telling us that all that doesn't matter. When we can do that, that's when we get to the Or Torah, that's when we get to the Or Ganos, that's when we really get to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Bayala Rebbe Shlita, Rabben Zion Rabinowitz, the Mavaser Tov last Chanukah said, in the darkest, longest night of the year, the light of Chanukah shines. The Yetzer Hara plants in our hearts the false notion that the situation is hopeless, that we will never be able to escape our problems. The war of the Chashmonaim against the Greeks was the war of each individual against this Yetzer Hara. Each Yom Tov has its own particular blessing on the Jewish people as a whole and on each individual. The blessing of Chanukah is the strength to stay happy and optimistic, no matter how hard things get. There's an inner point of holiness in every Jew. There's a hidden jug of oil from which miraculous light will shine. At Chanukah, the darkest point of the year, Jewish tradition is teaching us that we light candles. We sit and bask in their glory. We reflect on ourselves and we figure out how we can overcome our innate desires for physicality. We learn that what's really important is to light our Pintel Yid, our Chelik Elokami Mal Mamish, our Nitzotos, our sparks inside of us. After all, we can only spread the miracle of Chanukah, the miracle of the light, the miracle of Jewish survival and of Hashem's presence in this world, if we ignite our fires and we choose again to become our best selves. As we step into Chanukah, let's renew our commitment to bring a little bit of light into the vast darkness around us. No matter our surroundings, we have the ability to rise above them, to rise above our current situation, to bring the light of Hashem, of the Jewish people, and of ourselves into each and every moment. As the Biala Rebbe ended off his Maimar, and as I want to end up my Maimar, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us all, and may we merit the coming of Mashiach, the Gula Shalem V'Amitis B'Mhera V'Yaminu, Amen V'Amen.